Joining. I am Zoe Zirup. I'm joined here by a lovely group of folks who are energy experts from all around the Midwest region, and we're just excited to dive into what REAP is. So just to kick things off, though, I wanted to start with REAP and helping you all understand a little bit more about what GLBN does and how REAP plays into GLBN here. So Lisa, I'll have you go to the next screen. So today, this is being hosted by the Great Lakes Business Network, which myself and Lisa work for. I am the program coordinator here, and we were founded in 2017 with a mission to shut down Line 5. And we've grown our issue areas to work also on adopting clean energy and then protecting the Great Lakes, which all, of course, go hand in hand. We've grown from 11 key businesses to now over 220, with the aim to be a group of business leaders that advocate for thriving ecosystems, economies, and communities in the Great Lakes region. We work in all 8 states that touch the Great Lakes, and we do a lot of advocacy opportunities for our members, like flying to DC, hosting educational webinars like this, and penning op-eds for climate. Take us to the next slide. So we're here to talk about REAP. REAP is the Renewable Energy for America program that's been around for 22 years. There are a variety of grants aimed at helping agriculture producers and rural small business owners make energy efficiency improvements and renewable energy investments to lower energy cost. We saw a huge bump with REAP applications during the Inflation Reduction Act, and while those applications have been paused because of a backlog, due to the numerous applications and such high demand, REAP is still available through the Farm Bill funding and has been for the last 22 years. So we're continuing with this webinar for that reason, because there is still funds through Farm Bill. And so we want to see those funds obligated to different projects before any potential changes come. And so we're grateful to have folks here today that have a lot of experience with REAP. We have members that have had REAP installations done on their businesses. We have members that have helped do the installations. So we'll be walking through that process with you all. I'll take you to the next slide. And so what's all the excitement about? Well, there's a lot that's happening. We know that energy costs are fluctuating. We know that there's certainly an expectation from consumers for brands to incorporate sustainable actions into their practices. There's also certainly grid resilience. In the Midwest, we have a huge issue with our power grids and reliability. And so this is an opportunity to get clean energy on your property or directly at your business and help with that resilience. Also, the opportunity to reduce your carbon footprint if that's something that you're tracking for your business, and achieve those sustainability goals. Next slide. All right, so here we'll shift a little bit from me to some of our other folks. And so, like I said, I want to introduce our lovely folks, panelists that we have with us here today. And I'll start by kicking it over to Jeffrey.
Good morning. I am with USDA Rural Development. I've been here for a few years now, working specifically on REAP the last couple years. So hopefully I can answer any questions and help you get, especially if you're an applicant in Michigan, get your application going and submitted. So.
Great. I'll pass it to Brittany.
Hi, I'm Brittany Good. I've been working for All Day Coffee for almost 10 years now, and specifically on our sustainability projects for pretty much that whole time. So this one was a big one, and super excited that we got it accomplished, and excited to share more about it later.
Folks at Keene? Oh, they got it muted.
I'm Tim Pulliam, the co-founder at Keene Technical. We do a variety of renewable energy and energy efficiency projects around the country in the Midwest. Most of our REAP focus is here in Michigan, although we have done REAP projects in other states. I also have TJ Brown here with me today. He's a VP and he handles a lot of our REAP applications. TJ, I don't know if you want to just introduce yourself real quick.
Thanks. Yeah, great. No, it's exciting to be here. Thanks for the invitation. And as Tim mentioned, we do REAP all over the country, and it's a lot different in Michigan. There's a lot more support. It's amazing. So thanks.
Yeah, and I don't have the stats on it, but I know that Michigan is certainly leading the way on the clean energy investments in the last few years, which is amazing. And Lisa, I'll just have you introduce yourself as well.
Good morning, all. I'm Lisa Dinan, a program manager with the Great Lakes Business Network, and very excited to be here with all of you today.
Amazing. All right, we will kick it over to hear from Jeff. And Jeff, feel free to just call out when you need slides changed.
Sure thing. All right, so yeah, I will cover the basics for the Renewable Energy for America program, which is through rural development. Obviously, Zoe's already kind of touched on, there's a lot of changes happening right now, and you may have heard of some, the 50% reimbursement. Obviously, that's going to it's basically sunset with the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act. So we're going to focus on Farm Bill funded REAP, which is the 25% reimbursement. Go ahead and move the slide forward. There's two prongs to the REAP program. The first and the most prolific of those is the renewable energy systems. I would say probably 95% of our portfolio is solar. That's not to say that, those other applications aren't good, but just to highlight that we do see a lot of that, but there is the other prong, which is the energy efficiency improvements. And we'll get into some of the details of those too in the next couple of slides, but just be aware that it is, you can't combo those as one application. It's either one application for solar or renewable energy or one for energy efficiency. Go ahead and slide. So for right now, grant funding, obviously we're going towards renewable energy systems for the RES for the energy efficiency. We do also have technical assistance available through it's a, I would say, sister program. It's called EAREDA, which is energy audits or renewable energy development assistance. So there is some technical assistance out there. And I believe that last fiscal year, we also did a technical assistance grant specific to helping smaller size applications get essentially assistance with grant writing through some of the grant awardees through the state. But we can touch on that a little bit later, but we'll focus on REAP in general. So next slide. So eligible entities, it's very simple. We're doing rural small business or agricultural producer. And some of the details I think are on the next slide as to what those definitions are. Go ahead. So for small business, we're looking at SBA size standards. So your industry, based on whatever your small business is, you'll have a NAICS code. I think it stands for North American Industrial Code System, but you'll have a code. And based on that, there'll either be a number of employees limit or a gross income per fiscal year limit. And if you're under those, you would qualify as a small business. And then, of course, we can entertain applications from multiple types of entities as long as they fall under those size guidelines as listed here. Additionally, we're looking at, you have to be rural. So we're looking at areas that are 50,000 or less, or if you have a low population, but you're kind of contingent to a larger area, say Detroit, that may still be considered urban. So you definitely want to check the eligibility map tool, which I think is on another slide coming up here, but I'll put it in chat. I think this goes just to Lisa, but you guys can also send that out as well. So the other way to become eligible is if you're an agricultural producer. And so we're looking at if your gross income is 50% or more from the agricultural operations, which here's some fine examples of those, then you're eligible no matter where you're at. So you could be in the heart of Detroit and be, have hoop houses up. That's, you're just doing agricultural production there. You're fully eligible. So that is another way to qualify. Next slide. And this is the link that I mentioned. We put it in chat just in case the slide's not clickable, and maybe you guys will send this out afterwards, right? The whole slide deck. But that is where you want to go first. This is kind of an instruction on how to go through that. You're basically drilling down to the program specific that you're looking for. So it'll be just like any other mapping tool that you use online where you can type your address in or even zoom in, zoom out, look around the state of Michigan, see what's eligible. That's where you want to go there first to make sure that your location is eligible. If you're an agricultural producer, it doesn't matter. You're eligible anywhere. But worth checking that out. Next up, we'll go into a little bit more detail on what is eligible. So go ahead and slide. So as I mentioned, renewable energy projects, we're looking at anything that is a commercially available technology. I said the majority of our portfolio is solar. It's very easily accessible, and there's a lot of companies in Michigan that'll do it. I've only seen maybe, besides that, a couple, maybe one small hydroelectric. We've seen a few anaerobic digesters. Those are pretty cool, big projects. A couple biomass. I've seen, I think now 3 geothermal. So, obviously any of those are eligible. Very cool projects. Let's click over next for the energy efficiency side of things. Essentially, for energy efficiency, we're looking at anything that can save costs, energy costs in your business or your ag production. What I see the most of is usually HVAC, lighting. I've definitely seen some doors and windows. Is obvious, as long as you can prove that they're energy efficient, and they're going to be an upgrade from what you currently have. That's all applicable. So those are some other examples there, but it's pretty much anything, anything that's energy efficient that we can go towards energy savings. So just keep in mind, there are always caveats. It's a federal program. There's a lot of extra red tape. Renewable energy systems, you're going to have to typically, we're going to be looking for at least a full technical report. So it'll include, system specs, generation numbers, some of that. A lot of those are proven, well, especially solar. Solar is a proven technology, so we don't really need a super in-depth one on that as long as we have the what I just previously mentioned. Usually they don't require a feasibility study, but sometimes. And obviously you can work with me depending on your project. If it's something that we don't see a lot of, it may require a feasibility study. Energy efficiency side of things, though, it is a little bit more important. Typically, we're looking for an energy assessment or an energy audit, except for on some of those really smaller projects. Typically, what, for instance, Keen can provide as far as energy savings analysis is able to be sufficient for that requirement. But if it's a larger project, we might require an actual third-party energy audit. And then the other thing here to look out for is if you have a ground-breaking project, anything that's going to do any sort of ground disturbance, there may be environmental required, especially if it's over 10 acres. Then we're going to look at an environmental assessment, which, that is a much higher level review, and can take a little bit extra time. So if that's something that someone has, you want to reach out to me way ahead of time so we can get that moving. Sometimes we're able to provide a little bit of leeway for the smaller projects or those projects that are very close to a building, an outbuilding, or within the facility, grounds. We might be able to kind of expedite those and avoid some of the extra environmental processing, but that's on a case-by-case basis. So go ahead, next slide. So what kind of funding is available? Go ahead and slide. Yep. So as mentioned, it used to be 50%. That was just Inflation Reduction Act, which, I forget what Aldea Coffee, what they got in at, but it might have been above 25%. But right now we're just looking at Farm Bill. So we're only doing 25% reimbursement towards eligible project costs. Just so you see here, renewable energy systems and the energy efficiency improvements, those two different prongs each have their own either minimum or maximum. So we're looking at, in a fiscal year, one given applicant can only ever receive a maximum of 1,000 or 1 million there. Or technically, if they have 2 apps in that fiscal year, one that is a renewable energy system and then one that is an energy efficiency improvement, you can technically get to 1.5 million total in a fiscal year per an applicant. But we do have, and then of course we have the minimums. So obviously we don't want smaller projects that are below those, but unlikely that that'll occur. Go ahead. So eligible project costs. So we're looking at, primarily we're looking at the equipment. So purchase, installation, the labor that goes towards the installation of that system. Anything that is, we're looking at essentially post-application. I would caution anyone that's applying not to incur costs until you have an application with us on file. And if there's environmental required, that we have to go through that first. Don't incur costs until that is done. Just because any costs incurred prior to application are technically ineligible, which could even invalidate an entire application. So be very careful. Other eligible costs listed here, the professional service fees, permits, licenses. We can do working capital and land acquisition, but only when it's in conjunction with a loan combo, because we have a guaranteed loan that can also be the other side of this. It's not just a grant program. Guaranteed loan, very similar to any other federal guaranteed loan program, where essentially the applicant is getting their loan from an approved lender, and they are basically, the lender comes to us and says, can you put a guarantee on this? It's basically absolves it from some of the risk. But that's, only in those instances where it's a combo. Ineligible project costs, we can't unfortunately do any sort of vehicle, rolling stock, tillage equipment. That may, I don't know, we've kind of postulated that may change in the future, especially with the use of drone technology. Hopefully it opens up to include those, because that would be huge for ag producers. But currently it's ineligible. We can't do construction for facilities or improvements of those facilities unless it's obviously an energy efficiency improvement. We can't do grant writer fees or anything that obviously is incurred prior to the application, lease payments, or we can't do like a pass-through grant that goes payments directly to the owner. So those are some of the basics. Go ahead, next slide. And oh yeah, I forgot. We have a few examples in here. This one was a veterinary hospital that just put solar right on the roof. Very easy, very clean project. Whenever it's rooftop, we don't have to involve environmental, or it's very easy, I should say. And especially, I'd like to point out here, this one was a 20,000 or less grant request for REAP. If you have 20,000 or less as your federal request, it technically can compete in a set-aside pool for small projects. And historically in Michigan, those projects have not had as fierce of a competition as, for say, our unrestricted pool. So increases chances if you have a smaller project, which I prefer. I like when it prioritizes small projects, but we can stretch basically our Michigan budget can fund a lot more of those. So you can see some of the other data here with that as an example. Moving on to an energy efficiency improvement one example here. They completely did their HVAC and added insulation in some key points. And this one was able to, obviously, huge savings overall. And that was actually under 20,000 requests. So they were funded very easily. I think we have one more example, which this one was for sap preheating for maple syrup and their evaporation system. And you'll see again here, this might have been during the 25% prior. So obviously, as Zoe mentioned, Farm Bill's been around for 20 some years, and it's been historically 25% reimbursement. So that's why you're seeing smaller numbers on those grant requests. But that was another great one that was able to help energy savings, and we got that one through and awarded. I think that's it, except for maybe a contact page here. We do have a state energy coordinator for Michigan. His name is Rick Vanderbeek, and I work directly with him. We're the two main points of contact for REAP in the state. And these other links on our main webpage, the To Apply tab, has every document that you need, and it'll walk you through things. And then, of course, you'll either be in contact with myself or Rick when you apply, and we'll help you process your application. And I think that's it.
Yeah, thank you so much for giving all that background. And folks, if you have questions, please drop them in the chat. We'll take some time here now to hear from Team Technical Solutions based in Traverse City about their experiences.
Yeah, hello, good morning, and thank you everybody for being here. And thanks, Jeffrey, for going through all those slides and helping explain to people what it is. I think I'd just like to start, maybe we just have one slide up. I want to talk a little bit about what we actually see on the implementation side of these projects. And, I guess I'd start with, there's a lot more rural areas than what you might imagine. I'm not sure the breadth of area that everyone on this call is from, but it's surprising when you do go to that map that, I mean, there's pockets outside of Jackson, Michigan, for instance, that we hit. There's places in the thumb just outside of Port Huron. There's pretty much everything north of M55. So it is surprising the amount of areas that are covered under the REAP map, and also the size of the business is always surprising. While in our pocket here, close to our home base in Traverse City, we love to see a lot of those funds come back and be leveraged by small businesses. The small business designation actually is also pretty broad in scope. And, you know, we've done businesses, I would say, probably up close to 1,000 employees. Sometimes these are multi-million-dollar businesses and projects. So every project is good, big or small, but definitely if you're bigger and in a less rural area, make sure you check out the map and the requirements, because it is, you know, I would say that we surprise clients a lot of times with the fact that they are eligible. And another thing I think that's important, and one thing that we notice when we're doing these projects, is it can be a project that you want to do specifically because of REAP, but one of the most important things, and one of the best ways we see these projects end up getting leveraged and used, is almost anything that involves a mechanical or electrical connection, anything that's going to get hooked up to a utility. If it's ending up in your capital improvement plan, it's not a bad idea if you have somebody in-house, or to reach out to somebody like us or your incumbent mechanical or electrical contractors, and just be sure if there's a more efficient option or a lower energy intensity way of doing things that you didn't think about, that you have that at least worked up as a proposal and maybe a model, because we're at 25% now. We were lucky enough to be up to 50% for the past year and a half or so. Whatever the case, the clients that were able to leverage the opportunities the fastest were ones that kind of had shovel-ready ideas put together with an understanding of what the energy opportunity was. And so when you think you have an old boiler that you need to change and it's coming up in a couple of years, it's a great time now to model maybe a more efficient option. And that's true with any process equipment, any HVAC equipment, any electrical equipment. Obviously, it's a little more front of mind with renewable energy projects because you're not upgrading something. A lot of times that's not something that you're thinking of, or even from a catastrophic failure standpoint, like you have a piece of equipment fail, it's possible that you could qualify for REAP, even for the replacement of those existing systems. And so, you know, I think that's one thing our process helps people do, is it helps you look at not only like the wish list of things you'd like to do, but of the things that you know you have to do. Are you going to be sure to capture those opportunities? And REAP is a great way that's also stackable with other opportunities that still exist. So you can get REAP on top of energy efficiency rebates from your utility. And some utilities now have rolled out actually renewable energy rebates with per kilowatt incentives for installed production. And so, you know, that's what our process allows you to do. We do the inspection, we take a look at your historical analysis, and then we identify not only maybe opportunities that you didn't think about, but how to best leverage these programs for things that you kind of planned on doing anyways. And then we're also around to help with sourcing and implementation and things like that. I think, you know, we probably in the past couple of years have done 15 or 20 REAP specific projects. And they're everything from renewable energy to energy efficiency, HVAC replacements, lighting projects, building automation, and the solar and energy storage. And one thing I didn't hear Jeff touch on, and maybe he can just help clarify, because I'm not sure. For a while, standalone storage also qualified. Is that still the case, Jeff, now that we're back to just farm bill funding?
We're not allowed to do standalone storage. Part of that would be, well, I mean, technically, I think someone could submit an application, but it would score almost 0 points because there's no generation, and that's a huge point of our score sheet. Is we need to see generation numbers. So I would caution, it's kind of a give and take too. If you're submitting an application that includes storage on a solar system, for instance, that increases the system cost, but it doesn't increase generation. So we're looking at like probably a significant hit to the score sheet. But it kind of depends on your project too. If it's worth that risk of having a lower score, or if you want to not include it as part of the project, submit it to us, and then just have your solar or whatever it is compete without that. The other thing too is technically I don't have the technical expertise to do a technical review on battery storage, so I have to kick those up to national office, and they typically take a little bit longer to process. It kind of slows things down. I would caution people not to, especially because Farm Bill, we're going to get more competitive. I think we're going to have limited funds, so you want to be as competitive as possible, but
So the best
apply however you want.
generation, the best ROI, the best generation, solar only at this point is better. And on the renewable side, and also on like the geothermal, which also qualifies for REAP, as long as we have access to the federal tax credits, that's also stackable too. So you can combine REAP and the tax credits and the utility incentives. So some of those project slides we saw examples of showed a REAP contribution and an owner contribution, but in many cases there could be a REAP contribution and an owner contribution and a utility contribution. And in Michigan, we are rolling out, I believe, and I guess all this is potentially subject to change, but the My Healthy Climate programs are starting to roll out. And I think we're supposed to see more of those come online by the end of the month. So there will be additional state funding for energy efficiency and possibly renewable energy projects too. And so when you put all that together in your capital stack, and then also the fact that there's also a funding mechanism, it can all of a sudden, make the ROI still really well. The 25%, it's a great tool to help leverage into that stack. And then I think I'll turn over to TJ for a minute and see what he would like to add.
Just a couple, experiences, looking at the proof of funding, some of the other requirements is having that blank bank letter. And Michigan Saves is getting creative with some of the gap financing in between the grant period and the award period. Projects that we're, again, having experience with. But the more shovel ready, the more likelihood it's going to be funded. So going through some of those preliminaries, if civil engineering is required, or, some of those things that you want to include, just to make your application look better as part of the program. And we're seeing a lot more fuel switching opportunities, which for us is really exciting. And I'm curious and working more, just to show and plead the case for the opportunities that are coincided with fuel switching, with all electrification or electrified systems. And then building in, those best solutions possible, where Buy American makes sense to get the additional 10% tax credit. We're working a lot directly through distribution mechanisms that have those availabilities. And we like, getting ahead of that on the front end too, and building those costs in on the front end. Same thing with like warranty service and monitoring. That's another thing that we've been really excited about, is that, when we come in and do a project with you, that's not just it. We're looking at, your next projects and next available REAP applications when it comes to your other systems throughout the facility. And we do that, through service, which has been really successful. Looking forward to doing more. And then, of course, the technical reporting requirements after your project's installed, your grant's awarded. And maybe, Jeffrey, you want to include some of that too, but that's something we've really been excited about is, celebrating that meaning, putting the dollars to it, looking at the carbon dioxide reductions, and making sure that everyone's aware of that meaning 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, as projects are successful.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. And I just love hearing the variety of businesses that are being engaged in the clean energy transition, especially our rural businesses. I think that's so important that they're coming along and experiencing the benefits as well from, like we said, the state, utility, federal level incentives that we have available. So I'm at this point going to kick it over to Brittany with Aldea Coffee, so she can share a little bit about her experience with REAP.
Yeah, hi everybody. First, I will share just a little background of who we are. We started as a direct trade coffee company importing green coffee from Honduras. Our nonprofit there still exists today, and we still source majority of our green coffee from that nonprofit in Honduras. So when we started as a business in 2015, the two owners, Andrew and Jeremy, knew immediately that we were going to be a B Corp someday. Around 2020, that certification came through, and our mission statement aligns very much with our B Corp mission and our presence here in West Michigan and just really preserving the earth. So I am a part of a lot of other sustainability organizations in the area, and so the REAP grant was one part of our conversations that were coming up at the city of Grand Haven when I realized that we could apply for that as a business with Aldea. So we ended up working with Chart House Energy. They're also based in Muskegon. So it was a really close relationship with them, and they worked through all of the paperwork with us, literally line by line. It was amazing. They did a great job with us. I have a good friendship with the two girls that work there, so it worked out really well for us to communicate and see each other often and get all of that submitted. Our system is a 20 kilowatt system, so we're not quite hitting that 100%, but over the summer we did see the generation was very, very high. So the system got turned out at the end of July, so I only have a few months worth of data really from those really sunny months here in West Michigan. So really looking forward to being able to evaluate a full year's worth of data once the summer hits again this year. We also had a really great experience working with the USDA. Jeffrey, Heidi, and Rick all just like very responsive, guiding me through what I needed, answering the phone if I had questions, and just really positive attitudes, very kind people to communicate with. You know, working through documents is really difficult if you're not used to it, especially these ones. They don't look like anything like I've worked on before, you know, so it was really cool to have a lot of people guiding us through all of that. Yeah, and then I was going to share that the USDA actually came to visit us as well. We met, I think, 3 or 4 people, some that work in Michigan and some that work in DC, and they had never heard of us before either. So it's pretty interesting to see too how our sustainability initiatives and our energy reduction is hitting us on a coffee side of it and just helping us kind of tell our story and just who we are as an organization. And I was going to share, yep, so our full total project cost was about 97,000, and the REAP grant that we received was 20. So that covered that piece. And we were reimbursed within, I would say, 3 or 4 months of the installation being completed. And that process also was very, very simple. The money was deposited directly into our account. So I think all of that was streamlined and very easy to do. And I am more than happy to talk to anyone who wants to dig deeper into how Aldea did this and what our plans are for the future. And to be honest, I'm learning a lot from this webinar as well. So it was really nice that you put this together for us, Zoe.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. I appreciate that. And if Lisa, you go to the next slide, we have everyone's contact information for folks who are eager to dive into REAP and ask questions to some of our panelists here. I provided their emails. And we have one question in the chat that I wanted to pass off, and it's from Tom, and he's asking, are there REAP scores different for domestic versus offshore solar panels? I presume that's referring to where they're made.
Yeah, so currently we don't have any scoring difference. Obviously, the new administration is gonna have its own administrative points that they're gonna allocate. I think the last prior Trump administration, the admin points were prioritizing small businesses. You know, so that is definitely going to change. I don't know if it'll be location, you know, production of the panels or whatever system is, you know, that could be. Just keep an eye on the website. And then the other question I see here, can construction begin before final REAP approval? You can begin construction after we have an application on file and we've essentially confirmed that environmental is either not needed or it's completed. If you begin breaking ground on a project that has ground disturbance and we haven't done those environmental steps, it's completely ineligible. It invalidates the entire project. So be sure to make sure talking with us that you've done everything and you have the environmental and everything covered. And I should
Okay.
also mention next deadline for REAP is March 31st.
That's a quicker turnaround.
I do have just one point we can add on the Buy America. It does increase the federal tax credit, at least for the time being, by an additional 10%. So if you're going to use REAP and go after the federal tax credit, the Buy America does get you a bonus 10% on the tax credit. So, and it's pretty easy now. I mean, it's pretty amazing what we've seen scale up the past couple of years. It's not a premium anymore to get Buy American balance of systems, especially on the panels. Sometimes it's a little trickier on some of the balance of components and inverters and things, but at a minimum, you can get the bonus 10 on the panels. And really, there's great US made inverters that are price competitive now too. I mean, I don't think we're really seeing a difference. Sometimes we're seeing a difference in availability, but I don't think we're seeing a difference in price anymore.
Next question looks like, how long does it take for approval? So good question. So say our deadline is March 31st. It typically takes us about a week or 2 weeks to get that letter out saying you need environmental or you're good to go. You can start your project. After that point, I would say roughly 90 days from that deadline before we actually have everything scored, all of our ducks in a row, and we let applicants know whether they've been awarded. At that point, once we've said, hey, your project was awarded, you have 2 years to use those funds or to request reimbursement. So it's a pretty generous period of time. Great questions.
Yeah. We have another question, just following yesterday's executive orders. Any words of inspiration for clean energy? Looking at the future.
From my standpoint, I haven't received a single email yet. So I mean, you know, bureaucracy on a good day is snail pace. I don't know if we'll we'll see anything for a minute, but I'm optimistic. Yes.
Yes, here we're seeing good return on investments. Utility rebates are still going strong. REAP has existed through multiple administration changes. Yeah, and the technology has gotten to a point where the cost is low enough that the ROI is there in a lot of these situations anyway. So
yeah, I think that brings up something we've all been thinking, which is that the economics will provide a very valid argument for keeping this around. We have another question, which is there, are the number of grant cycles changing per year? And I think we don't know, or maybe we do.
Right now, yeah, it's a little up in the air. Our only known deadline right now is March 31st. They did signal previously that even though there's a pause on the IRA funded ones, they said that they anticipate reopening it, but that's obviously from one administration to another. So I would be surprised if it did reopen under IRA. I'm assuming those funds are just going to be pinched off and used elsewhere, but anything is possible. We may see complete overhauls to REAP, or we may see, currently we're existing on a continuing resolution funding of Farm Bill. So once they actually have a full Farm Bill processed and approved, that, you know, a 5-year plan, that could also change things, which, you know, we're optimistic that maybe they'll allocate more money towards the program now that it has even more well-known. It's way more outreach now, especially after that 50%. So hopefully we'll get more funding.
I did see another question. It's the 10%. Someone just mentioned. Oh no, yeah, it is a bonus 10% for domestic panels.
Well, I think the Q&A is slowing down a little, but a clarifying question from REAP. Yeah.
Not in relation to REAP. That was the tax credit, I believe, right?
Yeah, correct. That's tax credit, 10%. And there is another 10% actually on top of that. So it can be as high as 50% if you're in a distress zone. So, and there are distress zones that are in the REAP area. So you could get the 30 plus the bonus 10 for Buy America, plus the bonus 10 for a distress zone, plus the 25% for REAP, plus the utility rebates. So that And a lot of that stuff has been going on for quite some time. So I just don't anticipate the administration change being able to unroll all of those programs all at once. And so even with a couple remaining online, I think we're going to be okay. And one thing that none of us mentioned about REAP is it is, or at least it always has been, I assume it still will be, a rolling application. So if you don't get funded, your application does sit there. So that's why, like, things that are maybe in your capital improvement plan you're thinking about doing in the future, model a more efficient option, put it into an application, and turn it in and see what happens. It's a great way to leverage additional funding to be able to make your business more competitive and resilient. So I just encourage people to be optimistic when they're doing those things and get one in.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up. That is a very, very good point. So we don't operate on calendar years. We operate on fiscal years beginning in October. So any application we receive in a cycle will roll forward to that next quarter or next competition, however they decide to do it in future. For that entire fiscal year, you get to recompete. And then ultimately at the end of that fiscal year, we have, oh shoot. Can you hear me?
Yep, you're good.
Okay, I got a low battery notes. Yeah, you get to compete until the end of the fiscal year, which at that point we have a national pooling. So there's multiple chances to be awarded.
So if you can get it in before March, great. But we're hopeful that things will keep steady in some ways. Yeah. Looks like questions have petered out here. So I just really want to thank you all for taking your time and sharing your expertise with everyone. Thank you all to attended. And David, it looks like I do see your hand raised. If you have a question, I think I can allow you to talk if that's something you would like to do. And you have to go ahead and unmute yourself.
Well, I typed my question, but where do I find the grant application?
We will send out a recap of this and we can send a link to the REAP webinar where all that will be.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Alrighty, folks. Well, thank you all. I hope you enjoy the snow and get out to play in it and stay warm.